Deep beneath the surface of Nigea, they cowered in darkness, fearing the sky and shunning the sun. The Nigeans had never known the warmth of daylight on their translucent skin. Their eyes, adapted only to the faint glow of bioluminescent fungi, could not withstand the scorching rays that blazed across the planet's surface. To the Nigeans, sunlight was death incarnate. But one young Nigean dared to dream of a different life. Rigel, driven by an insatiable curiosity, pored over forbidden human astronomy texts, marveling at tales of the surface world. He yearned to feel the alien sun on his skin and gaze upon the stars, even as his elders warned of the deadly consequences. The arrival of human colonists from Earth upended the Nigeans' subterranean existence. These strange beings, protected by advanced exosuits and sun-shielding technology, traversed the surface of Nigea with ease. They sought to forge bonds with the Nigeans, to exchange knowledge and resources. But the Nigean High Council, fiercely isolationist and distrustful, saw the humans as a threat to their way of life. In Vincent Parker, the charismatic leader of the human colonists, Rigel found a kindred spirit. Vincent, determined to establish friendly relations, took the young Nigean under his wing. In secret, he taught Rigel the wonders of the surface world and the joys of basking in sunlight. With each clandestine visit, Rigel grew more convinced that his people's fear was misplaced. But the High Council would not tolerate dissent. When they learned of Rigel's forbidden excursions, they ordered him to cease all contact with the humans, threatening severe punishment for disobedience. Rigel, torn between loyalty to his people and the promise of a new way of life, faced an impossible choice. As tensions mount between the Nigeans and the human colonists, Rigel must decide where his allegiance lies. Will he defy the High Council and join Vincent in his mission to lead the Nigeans out of darkness? Or will he bow to tradition and condemn his people to an eternity in the shadows? The fate of two races hangs in the balance as Rigel stands on the precipice of a conflict that could herald a new era of interstellar cooperation, or the destruction of everything he holds dear. As the sun rose over the Nigean Plaza, Vincent Parker and his team set to work, transforming the space into a sunbathing pavilion. They strategically arranged sun loungers, unfurled colorful parasols, and laid out an assortment of specially formulated sunscreens designed for Nigean physiology. The atmosphere buzzed with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation as curious Nigeans began to gather, whispering amongst themselves. Influential Nigean leaders, their translucent skins shimmering in the early morning light, approached the pavilion with expressions ranging from skepticism to outright disdain. Dr. Zoran Kral, an esteemed scientist with a secretly inquisitive nature, stepped forward to inspect the setup, his bioluminescent eyes widening as he took in the scene. "This is madness," hissed High Counselor Dravik Tor, his voice dripping with contempt. "You expect us to expose ourselves to the very thing that has kept us confined to the depths for generations?" Vincent, undeterred by the counselor's hostility, smiled warmly. "I assure you, High Counselor, with the proper precautions, sunbathing can be a safe and enjoyable experience. Allow us to demonstrate." With a nod to his team, Vincent began applying the specially designed sunscreen to his own skin, its iridescent sheen catching the light. The human volunteers followed suit, their movements deliberate and reassuring. As they settled onto the sun loungers, the Nigean onlookers held their collective breath, expecting the worst. Minutes ticked by, and to the astonishment of the gathered Nigeans, the humans remained unharmed, their skin bronzing beneath the sun's rays. Murmurs of disbelief and curiosity rippled through the crowd. Dr. Kral, unable to contain his fascination, stepped forward, his voice trembling slightly as he addressed Vincent. "I must admit I am intrigued by your demonstration. Might I try it for myself?" Vincent's smile widened as he gestured for Dr. Kral to approach. With gentle movements, he applied the protective sunscreen to the scientist's translucent skin, watching as it shimmered like starlight. Dr. Kral, his heart pounding, slowly lowered himself onto a sun lounger, closing his eyes as the warmth of the sun enveloped him for the first time. A gasp escaped Dr. Kral's lips as he experienced a sensation unlike anything he had ever known. The sun's rays, once feared as a harbinger of death, now felt like a soothing embrace, invigorating his body and mind. As word of Dr. Crowell's positive experience spread, more Nagians began to cautiously approach the pavilion, their curiosity overcoming their deeply ingrained fears. Among the crowd, Lyra Soren, a young Nigean archaeologist with a fascination for the ancient surface-dwelling civilization, watched the proceedings with rapt attention. She saw in the humans' arrival a glimmer of hope, a chance for her people to reclaim their place in the sun. With a determined stride, she approached Vincent, her eyes shining with a mix of excitement and apprehension. As the day wore on, more and more Nigeans lined up to experience the joys of sunbathing for themselves. Laughter and chatter filled the air as Nigeans and humans lounged side by side, their differences momentarily forgotten in the shared warmth of the sun. Vincent and his team exchanged glances of triumph, daring to hope that this demonstration could be the catalyst for a new era of friendship and understanding between their two races. But in the shadows of the plaza, High Counselor Dravik Tor seethed with rage, his eyes narrowing as he watched the scene unfold. To him, the sunbathing pavilion represented a direct assault on Nigean tradition and identity. As he stalked away, his mind churned with dark thoughts of how to quash this dangerous human influence before it could take root in Nigean society. Rigel, watching from the fringes of the crowd, felt a swell of emotion in his chest. The sight of his fellow Nigeans basking in the sun, their fears melting away, filled him with a sense of pride and purpose. He knew that the path ahead would be fraught with challenges, but for the first time, he could see a glimmer of a brighter future for his people, a future where they could emerge from the darkness and take their rightful place in the light. The sunbathing pavilion's popularity grew rapidly in the days following its introduction. Nigeans of all ages flocked to experience the warmth of the sun on their skin, their translucent bodies shimmering in the light. The plaza buzzed with excited chatter as more and more citizens shed their fears and embraced this new sensation. But not everyone welcomed this change. High Counselor Dravik Tor stood at the edge of the plaza, his face contorted in disgust as he watched his fellow Nigeans lounging beneath the sun's rays. He turned to his aide, his voice low and menacing. "This cannot continue. These humans are corrupting our people, destroying centuries of tradition." His aide nodded nervously. "What do you propose, High Counselor?" Dravik's eyes narrowed. "We must remind our people of the dangers that lurk above. Gather our most loyal supporters. It's time to take action." As Dravik plotted in the shadows, Lyra Soren strode confidently through the sunbathing pavilion. The young archaeologist's eyes sparkled with excitement as she approached Vincent Parker. "Vincent, I've made an incredible discovery," she said, her voice brimming with enthusiasm. "I've found evidence that our ancestors once lived on the surface. We weren't always confined to the depths." Vincent's eyebrows rose in surprise. "That's fantastic, Lyra. This could change everything." Lyra nodded eagerly. "Exactly. I'm organizing a group called the Children of the Sun. We want to embrace this new knowledge and push for change in our society." As Lyra spoke, a commotion erupted at the edge of the plaza. A group of conservative Nigeans had gathered, their faces twisted in anger as they shouted at the sunbathers. "Traitors!" one of them yelled. "You're betraying our heritage, our very way of life." Rigel, who had been helping apply sunscreen to a group of elderly Nigeans, rushed over to defuse the situation. He raised his hands, speaking in a calm, measured tone. "Please, there's no need for hostility. We're simply exploring new possibilities for our people." The leader of the group sneered at Rigel. "You're nothing but a human puppet. Can't you see they're trying to destroy us?" Before Rigel could respond, a rock flew through the air, striking a nearby sun lounger. Panic erupted as more projectiles followed. Nigeans scrambled for cover, their peaceful day shattered by the sudden violence. In the chaos, Lyra was knocked to the ground, crying out in pain as a sharp stone grazed her arm. Vincent rushed to her side, shielding her with his body as he called for his team to help evacuate the area. Rigel stood frozen, torn between helping the injured and confronting the attackers. He locked eyes with the leader of the conservative group, recognizing him as one of Dravik's close associates. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This was no spontaneous outburst, but a calculated attack. As the dust settled and the injured were tended to, Rigel felt a surge of determination. He could no longer remain silent in the face of such blatant aggression. With determined steps, he made his way to the High Council chambers, prepared to speak out against the violence and the lies being spread by Dravik and his followers. The council members murmured among themselves as Rigel entered, his presence unexpected and unwelcome to many. He took a deep breath, steadying himself before addressing the assembled leaders. "Honorable members of the High Council," he began, his voice strong despite his nervousness. "I come before you today to speak out against the violence and misinformation that threaten to tear our society apart." As Rigel spoke, passionately arguing for openness and cooperation with the humans, he could see the council members' reactions ranging from thoughtful consideration to outright hostility. Dravik Tor, in particular, glared at him with undisguised contempt. Outside the council chambers, word of Rigel's speech spread quickly through the underground city. Nigans gathered in the small groups, debating the merits of embracing the surface world versus clinging to their traditional way of life. The once unified society began to fracture along ideological lines. In the human settlement, Vincent Parker paced anxiously, worried about the escalating tensions. He turned to his team, his face set with tenacity. "We need to do more," he said firmly. "It's not enough to just offer them the sun. We need to show them all the wonders that await them on the surface." As Vincent and his team brainstormed new ways to bridge the gap between their cultures, Lyra Soren worked tirelessly to gather more evidence of the Nigean surface-dwelling past. She delved deeper into forgotten archives and unexplored caverns, each new discovery fueling her conviction that her people were meant for more than a life in darkness. The lines were drawn. The battle for Nigea's future had begun in earnest. As both sides dug in, preparing for a protracted struggle, the fate of two species hung in the balance. The sun continued to shine on the surface above, indifferent to the turmoil unfolding in the depths below. The underground cities of Nigeria buzzed with tension as King Argon's face appeared on every holoscreen, his wrinkled visage a mask of steadfast perseverance. His voice, once warm and paternal, now carried an edge of steel as he delivered his decree. "My people, it grieves me to inform you that a great evil has taken root in our society. The practice of sunbathing, introduced by our human visitors, threatens the very fabric of our civilization. As your king, I cannot allow this corruption to spread further." Rigel watched in horror as King Argon outlined the new law, his heart sinking with each word. Sunbathing was now illegal, punishable by permanent exile. The humans were to be shunned, their influence purged from Nigean society. In the depths of the royal palace, High Counselor Dravik Tor allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. He had won. The effects of the decree were immediate and brutal. The Obsidian Guard, their black armor gleaming in the bioluminescent light of the caverns, swept through the cities. They raided homes, dragged suspected sunseekers from their beds, and made examples of those who resisted. Lyra Soren paced in her small apartment, her mind racing. She couldn't abandon the truth she had discovered, the evidence that her people had once lived on the surface. With trembling hands, she activated her comm device, sending out an encrypted message to her fellow sunseekers. "We will not be silenced. Meet at the usual place. Bring only what you can carry." In the human settlement, Vincent Parker received the news with a mixture of anger and disbelief. He gathered his team, their faces etched with concern. "We can't abandon them," he said, his voice low but firm. "We started this. We have a responsibility to see it through." As night fell on the surface, small groups of Nigeans emerged from hidden tunnels, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. Lyra greeted them, leading them to a secluded valley where they could bask in the starlight without fear of discovery. Rigel arrived last, his face haggard. "The Obsidian Guard is everywhere. We can't keep this up for long." Lyra squeezed his hand. "We have to try. Our people deserve the truth." Days turned into weeks as the resistance movement grew. Vincent and his colonists worked tirelessly, constructing a hidden sanctuary for exiled sunseekers. They used advanced camouflage technology to shield the settlement from Nigean sensors, creating a haven where the outcasts could live freely under the open sky. But their efforts didn't go unnoticed. The Obsidian Guard intensified their hunt, employing ever more brutal tactics. Lyra watched in horror as her friends and allies were dragged away, their screams echoing through the caverns. Then came the day of the televised trials. Lyra stood before the court, her head held high as Dravik Tor read out the charges against her. The sentence was swift and merciless: permanent exile. As the Obsidian Guard led Lyra and the other condemned prisoners to a transport bound for a remote exile camp, Rigel and Vincent sprang into action. They had spent weeks planning this moment, gathering intelligence and resources for a daring rescue mission. Under cover of darkness, they infiltrated the camp. The air crackled with energy weapon fire as Rigel's team engaged the guards. Vincent piloted a stealth shuttle, swooping low to extract the prisoners. Lyra's eyes widened as she saw Rigel appear, blaster in hand. "I thought you'd given up on us," she said, her voice hoarse. Rigel managed a grim smile. "Never." The escape was chaotic, with casualties on both sides. As they fled towards the human settlement, Lyra looked back at her home one last time, knowing she might never see it again. In the royal palace, King Argon received news of the breakout with cold fury. He turned to Dravik Tor, his eyes blazing. "Enough! Mobilize the army. We will crush this insurgency once and for all." As the human colony prepared for the coming siege, Vincent looked out over the ragtag group of Sunseekers and exiles. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but there was a fire in their eyes that gave him hope. The ground trembled as the first wave of Nigean war machines approached. The battle for the future of two civilizations was about to begin. The ground shook as the first wave of Nigean war machines crested the horizon. Vincent Parker surveyed the ragtag group of Sunseekers and exiles, their faces a mixture of fear and drive. He turned to Rigel, who stood beside him atop the hastily constructed barricade. "We need to buy time," Vincent said, his voice low. "Every minute counts." Rigel nodded, his translucent skin gleaming in the sunlight. "I'll lead the first line of defense. You coordinate from the command center." As Rigel descended to rally the troops, Vincent retreated to the heart of the colony. The command center buzzed with activity as human technicians and Nigean Sunseekers worked side by side, monitoring sensors and coordinating defenses. Lyra Soren burst through the door, her eyes wide with urgency. "Vincent, we've detected seismic disturbances. They're coming from below." Vincent's face hardened. He activated the colony-wide comm system. "All units, prepare for subterranean assault. Drill tanks incoming." The ground erupted in a shower of rock and dirt as massive Nigean drill tanks burst through the surface. Their metal hulls gleamed in the harsh sunlight as they disgorged waves of soldiers, their eyes shielded by dark visors. Rigel's voice crackled over the comm. "Sunseekers, form up! Remember your training!" The air crackled with energy as the human Nigean alliance unleashed a barrage of sun-powered weapons. Beams of concentrated light sliced through the air, leaving scorch marks on the advancing drill tanks. Vincent watched from the command center as the battle unfolded on multiple screens. The two forces clashed in a maelstrom of light and shadow, neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. Hours passed, and the stalemate deepened. Vincent's fingers flew over the holographic interface, redirecting resources and coordinating counterattacks. Sweat beaded on his brow as he searched for a way to break the deadlock. Rigel limped into the command center, his arm bearing a fresh burn. "We can't keep this up forever," he said, his voice hoarse. "We need a game changer." Vincent's eyes narrowed as an idea took shape. He turned to Lyra, who was poring over geological surveys. "Those tunnels they're using to bring in reinforcements, how stable are they?" Lyra's eyes widened as she grasped his meaning. "Unstable enough if we apply the right pressure." Vincent nodded, a grim smile on his face. "Then it's time we brought this fight into the light." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the battlefield, Vincent briefed a select team of humans and Sunseekers. Their mission: infiltrate the Nigean lines and plant explosive charges along key support columns. Rigel led the team through the chaos of battle, using the lengthening shadows as cover. They slipped past Nigean patrols, their hearts pounding as they placed each charge with painstaking precision. Back at the command center, Vincent watched the team's progress on a 3D map. His finger hovered over the detonation button, waiting for the signal. Rigel's voice crackled over the comm. "Charges set. We're clear." Vincent took a deep breath. "May the sun have mercy on us all," he muttered, and pressed the button. The ground shook with a violence that dwarfed even the massive drill tanks. A great crack split the earth, widening into a chasm that swallowed Nigen soldiers and war machines alike. As the dust settled, a shaft of brilliant sunlight pierced the gloom, illuminating the underground battlefield. Unprepared Nigen soldiers screamed as the light touched their skin, their flesh blistering and burning. The human Sunseeker Alliance pressed their advantage, driving back the disoriented enemy forces. Deep below the surface, in his subterranean command center, King Argon received the news of the catastrophe with cold fury. "Seal the breach," he roared. "Get our forces under cover." But even as he spoke, the ground beneath his feet began to tremble. The sinkhole spread, consuming tunnels and chambers, inexorably approaching the command center itself. Dravictor's eyes widened in terror as cracks appeared in the ceiling. "My king, we must evacuate!" Before Argon could respond, the ceiling gave way. Sunlight flooded the chamber, and for the first time in his long life, the king of Nijia felt the sun's burning touch on his skin. As chaos reigned below, Rigel and Lyra boarded a human aircraft, leading a daring sky strike team. Their target, the massive retractable dome protecting the Nigean capital. "This is our chance," Lyra said, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of excitement and fear, "to show our people the truth about their past and their future." The aircraft streaked across the sky, dodging anti-air fire from the city's defenses. Rigel gripped the controls tightly, his years of covert missions serving him well as he wove through the barrage. They reached the dome as the sun began to rise, its first rays glinting off the metal surface. Lyra's team rappelled onto the structure, working feverishly to override the locking mechanisms. With a great groan of protesting metal, the dome began to retract. Sunlight poured into the underground metropolis, illuminating streets and buildings that had known only darkness for countless generations. As the light spread, so too did the sound of a million voices raised in shock, fear, and wonder. The future of Nigeria hung in the balance, poised between shadow and light. The sunlight flooded through the retracting dome, bathing the Nigean capital in its warm glow. Screams of terror mingled with gasps of wonder as the long-hidden populace felt the sun's touch for the first time in generations. In the command center, Vincent Parker watched the chaos unfold on multiple screens. "Now's our chance," he said, turning to Lyra Sorn. "We need to move fast before anyone can regroup." Lyra nodded, her eyes gleaming with grit. "I'll lead a team to secure the atmospheric controls. You take communications." As they moved through the sunlit streets, they encountered pockets of resistance from the Obsidian Guard. But for every soldier who raised a weapon, 2 more threw down their arms, blinking in confusion at the unfamiliar light. Vincent's voice crackled over the comms. "Defense systems secured. Lyra, what's your status?" "Atmospheric controls are ours," she replied. "But we've got a situation here. It's High Counselor Dravictor." Dravik stumbled out of a nearby building, his face a mass of angry red blisters. His eyes, wild with pain and fury, locked onto Lyra. "You!" he snarled. "You've doomed us all!" Before he could reach for his weapon, 2 of his own guards restrained him. "Sir," one said, "it's over. Look around you." Dravik's shoulders slumped as he took in the scene. All around them, Nigens were emerging from their homes, tentatively reaching out to touch the warm rays of sunlight. Children laughed as they chased each other through sunbeams, their parents watching with a mixture of fear and wonder. In the following days, Vincent and Lyra worked tirelessly to establish the interim governing council. They set up emergency medical stations to treat those suffering from sun exposure, while also beginning a massive public education campaign about the benefits and risks of sunlight. But not everyone embraced the change. Deep in the underground tunnels, Dravictor gathered his loyalists. His face, now a patchwork of scars and grafted skin, twisted with hate as he addressed his followers. "They think they've won," he hissed, "but we still have one last card to play." Rigel, who had infiltrated the group, felt his blood run cold as Dravik unveiled his plan. The gamma-burst weapons were beyond anything he had imagined, capable of rendering the entire surface uninhabitable for generations. As Dravik's followers prepared for their final devastating attack, Rigel slipped away. He had to warn Vincent and Lyra before it was too late. In the newly established council chambers, Vincent and Lyra were deep in discussion when Rigel burst in, out of breath and wild-eyed. "Dravik," he gasped. "He's planning to irradiate the entire surface. We have to stop him." Vincent's face hardened. "Where?" "The old military bunker in Sector 7, Rigel replied, "but we don't have much time." As they raced to stop Dravik's madness, the future of Najea hung in the balance. The sun continued to shine overhead, oblivious to the desperate struggle unfolding beneath its life-giving rays. The gamma-burst weapons never saw the light of day. Vincent, Lyra, and Rigel's swift action thwarted Dravik Tor's final high-stakes endeavor. As the dust settled, Najea stood at the precipice of a new era. Decades passed, and the planet underwent a metamorphosis. The once subterranean civilization emerged into the sunlight, blinking but determined. Rigel and Lyra Soren found themselves at the forefront of this monumental shift, their expertise invaluable as they collaborated with human terraforming teams. "Look at this," Rigel said, gesturing to a holographic display of a new city plan. Lyra leaned in, her eyes scanning the intricate design. The layout maximized sunlight exposure, while providing ample shade for those still adjusting to surface life. "It's perfect," she breathed. "The gradual transition zones will help ease the more hesitant citizens into full sunlight." As they worked, Vincent Parker shuttled between Najea and Earth, facilitating technological exchanges. Solar power plants sprouted across the Nigean landscape, their gleaming panels drinking in the sun's rays. Advanced UV shielding materials, developed through human-Nigean cooperation, allowed for the construction of vast biodomes where even the most light-sensitive could enjoy the benefits of sunlight. The dissolution of the monarchy brought both celebration and uncertainty. King Argon's passing marked the end of an era, but it also ignited a fierce debate about Nigea's future governance. In the newly established council chambers, voices rose in heated discussion. "We need a figurehead," insisted one counselor, his face etched with worry. "The people require stability in these turbulent times." "No," countered another, her eyes blazing with conviction. "We have the opportunity to build something new, something truly representative of all Nigeans." The debate raged on, but the winds of change proved unstoppable. When the final votes were tallied, an overwhelming majority had ratified Nigea's first constitution, establishing a solar republic. Lyra Soren stood on the balcony of the presidential palace, her heart racing as she prepared to address the nation for the first time as its elected leader. Below, a sea of faces turned upward, their eyes shielded by protective lenses but filled with hope. "My fellow Nigerians," she began, her voice carrying across the square, "today we step fully into the light of a new day. Our journey has been long, but together we will build a future brighter than any of us could have imagined." As Lyra spoke, Rigel worked tirelessly behind the scenes. His role as scientific advisor proved crucial in integrating photobiology into every aspect of Nigean life. Hospitals developed sun therapy treatments, farms experimented with surface crops, and industries retooled to harness solar power. The transformation was not without its challenges. Dravik Tor's imprisoned loyalists, clinging to the old ways, launched a series of attacks on newly established surface outposts. But their efforts were swiftly quashed, their actions serving only to strengthen the purpose of the fledgling republic. 2 generations passed, and the landscape of Najea changed beyond recognition. The great underground metropolises, once the height of Nigean civilization, were carefully excavated and relocated. Human machinery aided in this monumental task, allowing for the preservation of priceless cultural artifacts and architectural marvels. The day finally arrived when the last remnants of the old capital were to be brought into the light. Millions gathered to witness the event, their faces a mix of excitement and trepidation. As the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, massive hydraulic lifts groaned into action. Slowly and possibly, the ancient city rose from its subterranean tomb. Gasps of awe rippled through the crowd as ornate spires and grand boulevards, untouched by sunlight for millennia, emerged into view. An elderly Nigean, his skin now accustomed to the sun's touch, turned to his granddaughter. "I never thought I'd see this day," he whispered, tears glistening in his eyes. "Our people, truly free at last." As Nigeria flourished under the sun's embrace, its people turned their gaze outward. Vincent Parker, now serving as humanity's solar ambassador, stood before a gathering of interstellar diplomats. His weathered face bore the marks of countless worlds visited, each with its own challenges and triumphs. "The path we offer is not an easy one," he said, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "But I have seen firsthand the transformative power of embracing the light. Together, we can guide the galaxy's sun-starved races towards a brighter future." And so, planet by planet, the great sun diaspora began to spread its illuminating influence across the stars. The galaxy awakened to a new era as Nigeria's transformation reverberated across the stars. President Lyra Soren stood before the Nigerian Council, her eyes alight with purpose. "We have a responsibility," she declared, her voice steady and resolute, "to share the gift of sunlight with those still trapped in darkness." The Nigerian Heliospheric Outreach Initiative was born, a bold mission to introduce subterranean species to the transformative power of daylight. Vincent Parker, now humanity's chief solar ambassador, found himself at the forefront of this interstellar endeavor. "Our first target," Vincent announced, gesturing to a holographic display, "is Java Prime, home to the Yithrak." The image showed a desolate world, its surface pockmarked with radioactive craters. Deep beneath, the insectoid Yithrak had carved out a civilization in lightless caverns. Rigel, now Nigeria's xenobiological sunlight acclimation advisor, leaned forward. "Their physiology will require careful adaptation. We'll need to start with controlled exposure." The initial contact with the Yithrak was met with hostility. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air as the outreach team's shuttles touched down on Java Prime's barren surface. "Hold your fire!" Vincent's voice boomed over the comms. "We come in peace." From the shadows emerged Zira, a Yithrak revolutionary. Her chitinous exoskeleton gleamed dully in the artificial light of the landing zone. "You bring destruction," she chittered, mandibles clicking. "Our way of life." "We bring change," Vincent interrupted gently. "A chance to see the universe in a new light, literally." Zira's compound eyes studied him intently. "Show me," she said finally. In the weeks that followed, Rigel worked tirelessly to establish sunlit hatching chambers. The first Yithrak larvae to emerge blinked in wonder at the warm rays, their bodies already adapting to the radiance. News of the Yithrak's transformation spread like wildfire across the galaxy. On countless worlds, cavity-dwelling species watched in awe as their former enemies embraced the light. But not all welcomed this change. On Sulukra, a world of perpetual twilight, militant factions decried the solarization mission as cultural genocide. "They would strip us of our very essence," thundered Vox Praetor Kalzin, his tendrils writhing in agitation. "We must resist this solar scourge." The attacks began swiftly and brutally. Sun-worshipping Yithrak colonists were slaughtered. Newly established phototropic outposts went dark, their inhabitants vanishing without a trace. In the midst of this chaos, Vincent found himself face-to-face with the Azak, a species that consumed stars for sustenance. Their vast fleets hovered at the edge of solarized space, a silent threat. "We offer a compromise," Vincent said, his heart pounding as he addressed the Azak overmind. "Join us in the galactic sun diaspora, and we'll help you transition your subterranean worlds." For agonizing moments, silence reigned. Then a crackling response. "We accept conditionally." As the solarization movement gained momentum, so too did the resistance. Lyra narrowly escaped an assassin's blade during a diplomatic summit on Nigeria. The attacker, a Sulukra extremist, was subdued, but the damage was done. Nigerian citizens took to the streets, demanding retribution. "Protect our light," they chanted, faces upturned to the sun they had learned to cherish. In a secure chamber deep within the presidential palace, Rigel presented his latest research to a grim-faced Lyra and Vincent. Gene therapies, he explained, pulling up complex genetic models. We can accelerate sun adaptation in resistant species. Vincent's brow furrowed. Forced evolution? That's a dangerous line to cross. It may be our only option, Rigel argued. The alternative is prolonged conflict. As they debated, reports flooded in of new attacks on solarized worlds. The galaxy teetered on the brink of all-out war, with light and darkness as the battle lines. Lyra stared out at the Nigean capital, its spires gleaming in the sunlight, the weight of countless worlds pressed down upon her shoulders as she contemplated the next move in this cosmic chess game. The Sun Diaspora's future hung in the balance, its noble intentions twisted by fear and misunderstanding. As shadows lengthened across the galaxy, the light of hope flickered, but refused to be extinguished. In that moment of crisis, Rigel approached Lyra with a plan that would alter the course of galactic history. We have the means to end this conflict decisively, Rigel said, his voice low and intense as he stood before the president's desk. He activated a holographic display showing complex genetic models. Mutagenic therapies. We can engineer phototropic adaptations within the underground races themselves. Lyra's eyes widened as she grasped the implications. You're talking about forcibly changing their biology? Vincent, who had been silently observing, stepped forward. This is madness. We can't violate the autonomy of entire species. But Rigel pressed on, his eyes alight with fervor. It's the only way to ensure lasting peace, to bring them into the light, whether they choose it or not. The debate raged for hours, tensions rising as the ethical implications were weighed against the threat of continued violence. In the end, it was the news of another Seleucra assassination attempt that tipped the scales. Lyra, her face etched with the weight of her decision, gave a single, solemn nod. Do it. Within days, quarantine facilities across multiple worlds hummed with activity. Rigel's team worked tirelessly, combining Nigen metamorphic catalyst with recovered Araniac gene mastering technologies. The first test subjects, Khazaira and Kulut prisoners, were exposed to carefully calibrated UV bombardment and retroviral vectors. The results were as swift as they were unsettling. Initially confused and resistant, the subjects underwent rapid transformations. Their bodies, once adapted for lightless caverns, began to crave sunlight. It's working, Rigel breathed, watching through a one-way mirror as a group of newly altered Khazaira basked contentedly under artificial sun lamps. They're embracing the light. Vincent observed the scene with growing horror. This isn't right, he muttered, turning away from the sight. We're playing gods with entire civilizations. But Rigel's success only fueled his tenacity. Facilities expanded, processing tens of thousands of captives each month. The scientist's eyes gleamed with an almost religious zeal as he oversaw the operations, earning him the moniker Gene Father among his devoted followers. Inevitably, word of the forced phototropization program leaked. Across subjugated cave worlds, outrage sparked violent uprisings. Xeno-Showa coalitions rallied their forces, decrying the project as irredentist xenocide. On the volcanic world of Ashkora, a tunneler fleet assembled for what they called the final Crusade of Eternal Night. Their leader, High War Master Vexthar, addressed his troops from the bridge of his command ship. The surface dwellers seek to unmake us, he growled, his voice echoing through cavernous halls. But we will show them the true power of the dark. The ensuing battles were fierce, but short-lived. Rigel's enhanced phosphors, their bodies now living weapons of concentrated sunlight, easily overwhelmed the tunnelers' antiquated radiation shielding. Orbital mirrors focused searing beams onto subterranean strongholds, flash evaporating entire Morlock's nursery warrens. As the victories mounted, Lyra's public statements remained conciliatory, speaking of peace and unity, but behind closed doors, she authorized an acceleration of the phototropization program. Trillions of captive Kliktha and Trog were processed and resettled on fledgling Solarii, their bodies and minds irrevocably altered. Vincent, unable to stomach the escalating violence and disregard for consent, tendered his resignation. "This isn't the path to enlightenment," he told Lyra in their final meeting. "It's tyranny, plain and simple." He retreated to a humble orbital sun rig, turning his back on the empire he had helped create. But even in his self-imposed exile, reports of Rigel's triumphs reached him. World after world surrendered to the inexorable march of enforced daylight. As the newly christened helioforming Imperium expanded its reach, a question burned in the minds of those who remembered the movement's idealistic beginnings. Had the gift of solar illumination become a curse? The answer, like the spreading light itself, seemed poised to consume all in its path. The silence that followed the helioforming Imperium's campaigns was deafening. On countless worlds, newly solarized species blinked in the unfamiliar sunlight, their bodies still adjusting to a radiance they had never known. But beneath the surface, calm, resentment simmered. Vincent Parker stood at the viewport of his modest sun rig, gazing out at the stars. His self-imposed exile had given him time to reflect, but it had also allowed him to uncover something extraordinary. In his hands, he clutched a data crystal, its facets glowing with an otherworldly light. "Computer, set course for Nigeia," he said, his voice heavy with purpose. As the Sunrig's engines hummed to life, Vincent's mind raced. The Arcturan preservers' data codices had revealed a truth too horrifying to ignore. He had to warn them, had to make them see before it was too late. The journey to Nigeia passed in a blur of star charts and hyperspace jumps. When Vincent finally set foot in the gleaming capital, he found a world transformed. Sunlight bathed every surface, and the air thrummed with the energy of a civilization in ascendance. He strode purposefully through the corridors of the presidential palace, ignoring the startled looks from staff who recognized the former solar ambassador. Outside Lyra's office, he paused, steeling himself for what was to come. Inside, he found Lyra and Rigel deep in conversation. They looked up, surprise etched on their faces. "Vincent," Lyra said, rising from her chair, "what are you doing here?" Without preamble, Vincent placed the data crystal on her desk. "We've made a terrible mistake," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. As the holographic projection sprang to life, filling the room with swirling stellar maps and cascading equations, Rigel's eyes widened in horror. The Arcturan simulations played out before them, showing galaxy after galaxy consumed by chain nova reactions. "It can't be," Rigel muttered, his face ashen. "The fought mutagenic triggers? They were supposed to bring life, not destroy it." Lyra's eyes sharp as she watched entire star systems vanish in bursts of cosmic fire. "This is a trick," she said, her voice hard. "Some ploy by the isolationists to undermine our work." Vincent shook his head. "I wish it were, but the Arcturans' predictions have never been wrong. We've set something in motion that we can't control." As if on cue, an aide burst into the room, face pale with shock. "Madam President, we're receiving reports from the Ramad vortex. Stars are going nova without warning. It's spreading faster than we can track." Lyra's composure cracked, the weight of billions of lives suddenly pressing down on her shoulders. She turned to Vincent, her eyes pleading. "What do we do?" Vincent activated another segment of the data crystal. A complex schematic materialized, showing massive energy arrays and swirling subspace vortices. "We save what we can," he said grimly. "The Arcturans left us a way out, but the cost..." As the full implications of the plan became clear, Rigel's face contorted with anguish. "We'd be abandoning entire sectors to burn." "It's that or lose everything," Vincent replied, his voice hollow. Lyra straightened, the mantle of leadership settling heavily upon her. "Then we have no choice. Vincent, coordinate the evacuations. Rigel, I need you to oversee the subspace displacement technology." As they rushed from the room, the sky outside began to flicker ominously. The stars were going out, one by one, each a funeral pyre for countless worlds. In the days that followed, chaos reigned. The Jaffa Core globular cluster vanished in a blinding flash, leaving behind only a rapidly expanding shell of superheated plasma. Refugee ships clogged every hyperspace lane, desperate to outrun the cosmic firestorm. Vincent found himself on the bridge of a massive evacuation cruiser, coordinating a flotilla of smaller ships as they raced against time. Through the view screen, He watched as entire solar systems winked out of existence, their matter consumed by the relentless fusion wavefront. "Sir, we can't hold this position much longer," a young officer reported, her voice strained. "The stellar incinerations are accelerating beyond our projections." Vincent nodded grimly. "Signal the civilian transports. We make for the displacement array in 5 minutes. Anyone not there, we can't wait." As the cruiser banked away from the inferno, Vincent caught a glimpse of a world they were leaving behind. Billions of pinpricks of light, each representing a life about to be snuffed out. He closed his eyes, willing away the tears that threatened to fall. Back on Nigeria, Rigel worked feverishly to bring the subspace displacement array online. His hands flew over control panels, making minute adjustments to the vast energies being channeled. "Initiating phase shift," he called out, his voice hoarse from hours of nonstop work. "Commencing subspace transition in 3, 2, 1. The world around him began to shimmer, reality itself seeming to flex and warp. As Nigeria phased into its new existence, Rigel caught one last glimpse of the galaxy he had helped to destroy. The fusion wavefront was visible now, a wall of fire consuming everything in its path. In that moment, as his homeworld transmuted into a hyperspherical anomaly, Rigel felt the full weight of his actions crash down upon him. The tears came then, hot and bitter, as he realized the true cost of his misguided zeal. Across the dying galaxy, Vincent watched helplessly as world after world vanished into the safety of subspace. Each successful transition was a victory, but the losses were beyond counting. As the last of the displacement arrays fired, he allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. They had saved something at least. The Milky Way, once a shining spiral of countless stars, now hung in space like a burnt-out cinder. In the vast, lightless expanses between what remained, Vincent's ship drifted. He stared out at the cosmic graveyard, his mind struggling to comprehend the scale of what had happened. A flicker of movement caught his eye, another ship emerging from the shadows. As it drew closer, Vincent recognized the energy signature. Rigel had survived. Their vessels matched velocities, a tenuous connection in the endless night. No words were exchanged, none were needed. In the silence of space, two men who had reshaped the fate of a galaxy faced an uncertain future. The stars were gone, but perhaps, in time, new light might emerge from the ashes of their folly. Until then, they would wait, guardians of the precious few who had escaped the flames.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. And for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.